My name is Mike Hamm. I'm the C.S. Mott Professor of Sustainable Agriculture at Michigan State University, the land grant of Michigan. And I'm here at FoodMed at the invitation of the conveners, but also because I think that healthcare has a hugely important role to play in developing a sustainable food system in the United States and across the globe. And that is a critical issue that we face today that we need to do something about. The reality is, for me, sustainability is quite simple. Sustainability is about maintaining options, maintaining paths for future choices, because we don't know what we're going to be confronted with in the future, and the more that we constrict our choices now, and the more that we limit our resources now, the less options we're going to have down the road. And one of the things in our food system that we've started limiting our options on is where our food comes from. And we're reversing that right now. So over the last 30, 40, 50 years, what have we done? We've concentrated our production areas into very tight regions of the country for the most part. So 50% of our domestic fruit and vegetable production is out of California, where if you look back in the 20s and 30s, what you'd find is that we had fruit and vegetable production across the United States in much greater quantities than we do today. Now, part of that is that we have better refrigeration, we have better post-harvest management, all that kind of stuff, so it can travel further and still maintain reasonable quality. But what we've done in that is that we have now restricted our options of where we can grow. And we continue to import greater and greater amounts of fruits and vegetables, for example. So now we import far more than we export with respect to fruits and vegetables. So we're relying on non-domestic sources for much of what we eat. And what's the damage in that? Well, it's providing jobs for people in developing countries, et cetera, et cetera. And all that's true. What's the downside? Populations of those countries are increasing. Those people need food. They need to feed their own population before they start thinking about export. In addition, climate change scenarios indicate that many of the places in the world where we're getting a lot of that food from now are going to experience some of the biggest extremes in climate change, in the tropical areas of the world especially. Domestically, we get large amounts of our produce, like I said, out of California and out of the Southwest, places that in fact are very low water areas. And the water in those areas is probably going to decline, again, with climate change scenarios. The competition for what water there is going to become more intense in those areas because of increases in population. So what that means is 20, 30 years from now, we're not going to be able to get food from the places that we're getting it from today. And our population is going to go up. So what does that mean? That means we need to distribute our production across the country. We're blessed in Michigan, quite honestly, because we have a very diverse agriculture. We have a great diversity of climates because of all the Great Lakes and the lake effects and everything. We have a great diversity of soils because of the history, the geological history of the area. And so what all that means is we have both the landscape potential, the environmental potential, and we still have the human skills to grow all these different things. And so now our challenge is not to lose that. So one of the figures that I put out there long ago that seems to have picked up some credence is that we have 3.8 million families in Michigan. You can do this analysis for any place in the country. Just take how many families there are, multiply it by 10. So 3.8 million families, $38 million a week could be spent on Michigan agricultural products by just spending $10 out of your food budget every week on Michigan products. Multiply that by 50 weeks. What do you get? You're at about $2 billion of annual sales. So there's a lot of economic potential in large numbers of people across the United States taking small steps to buy local. And what does that start to do? What that starts to do is rebalance the portfolio across the country of where we produce food, where we get food from. What does that do? That maintains our options down the road when we think about sustainability and about changing climate, changing population, changing land use patterns, and all the kinds of things we have to worry about in terms of guaranteeing a domestic food supply for a burgeoning population 20, 30, 40 years from now. Eating in season means that basically what you're doing is that you're consuming fresh products as they're available out of the farm. So in Michigan, what does that mean, for example? Well, it means that we can get strawberries for about 4 weeks a year because that's about the season when they're available here in Michigan. We can get tomatoes for about 2 months a year because that's the season when we can get them fresh off the vines in Michigan. We can do things like apples. We can get fresh apples about 10 months a year because with controlled atmosphere storage, you can preserve apples fresh for a long period of time after their harvest. So we can get apples from basically August through about May or so in Michigan and have them be nice and fresh. Now, the other opportunity that's out there, we can extend our thinking about what does in-season mean, because we now have technologies we can use where we can more sustainably produce things locally in what's right now the off-season. So we have unheated hoop houses, which if you're driving by them on the road or on the highway would look like a greenhouse. But the reality is there's no fossil fuel going into heating that hoop house. It's completely using the sun. Now, what does that mean in the middle of January when it's below freezing here? It means that it's pretty cold inside that hoop house. But it means that you've got a huge temperature differential between what's inside and what's outside. And research done at MSU and other places has shown that there's about 30 crops that you can grow inside those hoop houses 12 months a year. And so at the student farm at MSU, for example, they have a 48-week CSA. They're providing fresh product to their customers 48 weeks a year in unheated hoop houses. What's the other thing we can do with those? We can extend the growing season early and late in our traditional growing season, because a tomato plant that's grown inside one of those hoop houses probably starts to bear fruit about a month before the comparable tomato plant out in the field, and will keep producing for a month to 2 months after the tomato plants in the field have been killed off by frost. So now what you do is you take that tomato season of 2 months and extend it to 4 months. You take that the season of peppers from a month and a half to 3 months and extend it to 4 to 5 months. And so we can eat in season. We can think about eating more locally, eating more in season, and have season mean something new because of human cleverness at developing this technology, that as we progress there, we can think about that technology that's being constructed, being done with bio-based materials and more sustainable materials and all that kind of stuff, and do it in a way where we now extend the season to 12 months a year for about 30 different crops. In urban areas, in declining Midwestern cities, what is the potential for urban agriculture, and is it really scalable, or is it just going to be backyard gardens? And the answer to that, if we look at a city like Detroit, is pretty simple. A graduate student of mine, Catherine Colasante, just finished her master's thesis analyzing the publicly owned open space in Detroit. She took all the lots that have no buildings on them whatsoever, that are publicly owned, that are not parks or right-of-ways. It comes in Detroit to about 6,000 acres. About 10 sections of land, which is about a mile by 10 miles in size if you put it all together. And she analyzed that with various scenarios of season extension technology, not season extension technology, and all that. And what she found was that 1 million people in the city of Detroit could get 35 to 70% of their total fruit and vegetable needs to eat a healthy diet on that land inside Detroit. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, but it means that's kind of the boundary conditions of what could be done if we wanted to do it. So the point is, there is a huge opportunity to rethink our urban areas in a lot of these declining cities as manufacturing has moved out and they've depopulated, to think about re-energizing these cities as green cities, with a big component of that being food production.